joining us today. I'm Karin England. I'm a landscape architect and a park planner with Metro Vancouver Regional Parks. And today I'm hosting this half-hour session, which is part 2 of an ongoing series on various gardening topics. Last week we talked about food gardening, but today, in support of the International Day for Biological Diversity, we're talking about lawn alternatives. But before we go any further, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that the land we live on is the shared ancestral homeland of the Coast Salish First Nations. As someone whose work is linked to the land, I appreciate the example set by Indigenous peoples of how to live with a deep connection to nature. So as we said, today is the International Day for Biological Diversity, and I'd like to give a quick introduction to biodiversity for people who might not be familiar with the term. Biodiversity is the variability of species and ecosystems that is essential to maintaining ecological health. Biodiversity increases nature's ability to withstand and recover from disruptive activities and stresses. Healthy air and diverse ecosystems provide the basis of life for all of us, provides clean air, water, and healthy soils we need to produce the food that we eat. Metro Vancouver has created a free tool that supports people who want to garden in a more sustainable way, which in turn supports biodiversity. And I'd like to share that tool with you now. This is the Grow Green Guide. You can find it at growgreenguide.ca. It has free downloadable designs, information about plants that go well in our area, and it's got resources and information about various gardening topics written by local garden gurus on hot topics. So let's take a look at this free resource and imagine that we're using it through the lens of someone who's interested in growing a lawn, alternative lawn. So we've got a questionnaire you can take about your garden design space. It asks, what kind of space would you like to grow? So in our case, we're going to say we'd like to grow a lawn. How much sun does it get? We're going to say we get a lot of sun. Let's pretend we have poor, light, sandy soil, and that we will commit to watering it occasionally. You can see that in the background, the website has generated a list of designs that meet those certain growing criteria. So there's 3 different lawn alternatives that we have designed for you. One with thyme, one with clover, one that's a tapestry lawn with drought tolerant plants. Let's take a closer look at this one, the Thyme Saver Lawn. You can see that we've got here everything you need to create a thyme lawn, to prepare the soil, to plant it, and to care for it in the long term. And if you click download PDF, all of this is free for you to download, and you can keep it with you, or you can take it with you to a garden center and say, this is what I want to do. These are the things I need, and you can use it like a shopping list. So that is free for you to use on the website. Let's imagine you wanted to think about this differently though. Let's say you have a plant that you're particularly interested in. So in this case, we'll just say, I'm interested in thyme. You can see we've got all this information about thyme, 6 different kinds of thyme that we recommend for growing in our region. There's kind of general information about the plant, and if you select more information, you can get detailed information about the plant. And again, this is something that you can share with friends. If you wanted to send this information to friends, you can send it by email. The resources that we've got available to you, you can see we've got news, some information about vocabulary, gardening tips, about issues that we know people have lots of questions about, reducing water use, invasive species, habitat for birds and pollinators, etc. And you're always welcome to sign up for our mailing list so you can get all the news and updates from the Grow Green website. So there's a little bit of information about the Grow Green Guide and how you can access it. I'm very pleased to introduce to you now our guest for today. He is the principal instructor at the UBC Botanical Garden, where his students adore him in the horticulture training program. He knows a lot about many different topics related to landscape construction, landscape design, nursery production. If that weren't enough, he has managed the collections at the Van Dusen Botanical Garden and he's a very sought after presenter on various horticultural topics. It is really a great pleasure to welcome Egan Davis. Hi, Egan.
Hey, Karin, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm very good. This is fun.
Thanks so much for joining us here today. I just thought I'd start by asking you a question we can talk about, and then people, if they want, can type questions to us that we can answer through Facebook Live during the course of the presentation. I think I'll start off with this question. Why are you so passionate about horticulture and sharing your expertise with people?
Oh, that's a good question. So, all of my adult life, I've worked as a gardener, as a horticulturist, and that is a lifestyle. It's not a job or a career, it's a lifestyle. And I think, this was born out of me. My dad was a gardener. I grew up in Lynn Valley. I played in the forest, and it's a wonderful lifestyle. It allows you to be creative. There's a technical aspect. And the journey of learning just never stops. And I just love sharing that with anybody, students, people from the community. Sharing it allows me to kind of get into it, and it's a lot of fun. I love it. It has never stopped being a passion for me.
That shows every time I speak to you, your enthusiasm is infectious. You've got so many fantastic ideas. It would be a shame to keep them all to yourself, even. Today's topic is lawn alternatives. I know this is something that you think a lot about and do a lot about. Just backing up in time, what are traditional lawns good for, and what are the problems that they represent, traditional single species lawns?
Yeah, well, traditional lawns are a surface that, people enjoy sitting on and walking on and playing on. And so, there's value in that concept. But the way that we've managed lawns traditionally, and this really, began in the post-war 1950s with the single residential family home and the driveway and the front lawn and the patio and the barbecue. And, in order to get that kind of lush green golf course kind of quality, the turf species that we use require a lot of water and fertilizer, and you got to cut them. And that is problematic. And that used to be a status symbol. And we live in a different world now, and we're concerned about resources. We know the impact that we're having on the earth. And, I think it's great to cover the ground with green surfaces that, allow for water infiltration, that cool the environment, that possibly provide flowers for pollinators and other animals. And but let's just try to reimagine how we do that. And by using different species and by reimagining what that surface looks like, we can eliminate like mowing and watering and fertilizing, because all of that is it's truly just a waste of resources.
So when we talk about lawn alternatives, there are several common ones that get used. And I know you tend to think outside the box, even beyond that. You probably have an even bigger toolbox than most people are aware of. But can we just go through some of the ones that are more common, that you could just tell me what you think the benefits are and what the considerations are for each? Does that sound okay?
Yeah, well, I mean, categorically, you can approach a lawn alternative by just kind of adapting the turf grass lawn with different grass species and adding other species. So you still have a lawn, it's still grass, but you're not watering it and you're not mowing it as often. And so right now it's really popular. People are adding micro clover to lawns. And that is just so great, because like there's ecological relationships, there's interconnectedness with clover and grasses. So clovers belong in the pea family. They're legumes, and they have a relationship with bacteria, and bacteria feed off the clover, but as part of their processes, they release nitrogen, and they release about a pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, all right, a year. And, turf grass, the species that we use, typically require 4 times that much. But if you pair microclover with a fescue species, fescue has the same requirements that the clover produces, 1 pound of N per 1,000 square feet a year. So it's like a perfect balance. And I've sought after, natural prairie grasslands around the world to kind of just study the systems. And almost everywhere you go where you see grasses, there's a legume. It might be lupins or clover or something like this, but there's always a legume. And that's the interconnected relationship. There is the grass with the legume. So, that's one way to look at it, is to, just adapt the concept of a grass lawn. But then you can, tear out the lawn completely and move to more of a ground cover type situation. And so, there's the tapestry lawn idea, which is essentially just like a matrix of many low growing plants that weave together with a random pattern to it, which is really, really fun. And actually, your backdrop there is a time tapestry lawn, and that looks fantastic. And so that's exactly the idea. And so, this type of surface provides some of the benefits of your traditional lawn, but it actually takes away a lot of the problems associated. So, your time lawn there, that's not something that requires weekly mowing, and the plant is adapted to, dry soil, so it certainly doesn't need watering. In fact, if you watered and irrigate and fertilized time, it would probably make it rot. So that's a great alternative. And then you can, that surface, the great thing about, if you're staring out your window and you see a grass surface, that can be anything. You could build vegetable planter boxes, you could turn it into a food forest garden, you could do anything with it, right? And so the great thing about, lawn surfaces, they're a blank canvas. So anything from a different kind of grass lawn to a garden with trees and shrubs. So, you can do whatever you like.
I know you've talked about two kinds of lawns, or the microclover lawn and the tapestry lawn, both of which there's designs for those on the Grow Green Guide website.
Yep.
Another kind of lawn I'd like to speak with you about is a moss lawn. I know you've got some experience with that. What is that? What other conditions do you need to have a moss lawn, and where can you best apply that kind of lawn?
Yeah, well, something, I've worked in, garden maintenance before. I've cut grass in my 20s and used to do all kinds of things to kill moss, you know what I mean? And and people hated moss. They're like, how do I get the moss out of my lawn? And like, seriously, why fight that? So, moss will grow when the grass can't outcompete it. Like if the grass is vigorous grass will always outcompete moss. But it's all a matter of the niche environment that these plants are growing in. So, they kind of, mosses and grasses require kind of opposite ends of the spectrum. So grasses require good drainage, lots of light. Mosses will grow where it's dark, where it's shaded, where there's moisture. So, what I love, and what I've always loved about working with the public, people will say, geez, I have this problem. How do I fight it? And I think to myself, why don't you look at this as an opportunity instead of a problem? So if you've got a lawn and you're fighting the moss, my goodness, just let it go, and you can, if you want, you can start a moss lawn. A really great example, I was able to kind of get a whole bunch of moss off the surface one time and literally just transplant this moss from place A to a lawn area that was struggling. And it was just a fantastic aesthetic. It was like, like a forested property, and there was like some stonework, and I just, overnight it was like a moss lawn. But then on the Grow Green site, we have instructions for how to create a moss lawn with a blender and some yogurt. The great thing about moss, like moss doesn't have roots. So when you see moss, when you look at that plant tissue, it's just existing there. It's not like a plant with roots the roots have to interface with the soil. They have to become established, but moss will just grow on a surface. So the trick there is you can shred up some moss in a blender, and with yogurt or buttermilk. And these materials work because they're sticky, and they're also acidic, and so that helps with the moss establishment. And make a slurry, and you can and basically apply this slurry to various surfaces and grow moss. So that's something you can experiment with. But always it's best to kind of go with what's happening as opposed to struggling to impose. Like if you want a moss lawn but you've got a really bright sunny spot, then I would suggest not to do that. Like go with time, right? So
Right. You have to know your soil conditions and what kind of foot traffic you're going to be getting too.
yeah.
Some moss, as I've not had good luck in using it in places where there's small kids or pets that use the space.
Yeah. Well, I mean, moss doesn't have any resilience to foot traffic, and because it doesn't have any roots, so it just tears off the surface. But so if you've got, what actually looks really nice in a moss surface is if you've got a traffic route that people take. They will wear, the foot traffic will wear a path through the moss, and that's a really charming look. Is to these and actually it's really kind of nice. Like people tend to just want to walk from A to B, and so when you've got a surface like that and there's a pathway that kind of naturally wears into a moss surface, that's great. But yeah, moss is not a good surface for like dogs or kids. It doesn't have a lot of resilience that way.
What about sedum? I'm hearing more and more about sedum lawns.
Oh
What are
yeah.
the considerations for using sedum?
Well, sedum mats are just fantastic, and they'll grow. Something, if you've got like a rocky sandy surface and it's dry as a bone, you can get these, get sedum mats or use sedums, and they will thrive where it is dry and rocky. But again, the thing is with some of these plants is that they don't necessarily, it's not like a surface that you can have you play soccer on or have a dog run around on. But if you need to walk across it now and then, you can. But I think sedums are great. I think if you're going to use that type of thing, though, and this is the great thing about sedum, is that it thrives where there's in low resource environments where there's not very much water, where there's it's really hot and dry, like stressful environments. But if you've got deep, rich soil and it's moist and it's not a stressful environment, you're probably going to find plants like grasses will naturally seed in and outcompete the sedum. So in a high resource environment, grass will outcompete sedum. And so if you're trying to establish a sedum lawn or a sedum ground cover, it's best to prepare the site by basically making it the most stressful site you can you can imagine. Where and again, like just looking at natural systems, and I've traveled to look for flowers in meadows, but where the soil is deep, you see grasses, and where you have very shallow, rocky, dry soil, that's where the grasses, because grasses are competitors and they'll outcompete things like sedum. So you want to have a really stressful environment to have success with sedum.
I've seen sedum lawns used in places like the BCIT campus, for
Yeah.
example, places where they don't have the same level of maintenance as you would have in a residential garden, and they seem to thrive, and
Yeah.
less work for the maintenance
Oh
people
yeah.
there too.
Absolutely. And I built a garden actually a number of years ago, and it was a lawn, and we removed the lawn, and I installed some boulders, and was going for inspiration that I had from some hikes that I'd been on, and basically there were some plants that we chose as feature elements, but basically covered the ground with a really great cultivar, John Creech, which is a nice low growing sedum, and it's fantastic. And the homeowner was able to turn their irrigation off and not cut the grass every week, and it when you get a nice thick mat and it's nice and dry, sedum will outcompete weeds, and so it becomes a really truly low maintenance surface.
This is a good segue to a question we're getting from someone on
Okay.
Facebook. The question is, what about grubs? We've got a question actually from a couple people now about grubs in the lawn and how to deal with them. Now, this is a good segue, I think, onto lawn alternatives.
Well, the European chafer beetle has been the bane of lawns for the last number of years. And again, this is one of these things where I just think it's brilliant when you can see a problem and realize it's an opportunity. And so, the European chafer beetle comes in and crows, raccoons, skunks dig up the lawn. And then people struggle with this, right? And you've seen the snow fencing go down to what's the deal with snow fence on a lawn? Like, what are we trying to do here? Are we trying to make it look nice? And you struggle with it. But so what you have there is a disturbance in the grass. And what's really, really fun to do is see that disturbance as an opportunity, get some seeds of some wildflowers and sow them. And again, this is replicating a natural system. So if you go to a grassland, or you go to, like a steppe or a savanna, environment, you will see a predominance of grasses, but where you will see flowering plants is where there's been disturbance. So like in Eastern Europe, I've looked for plants, and in meadows, it's where the pigs dig that you see the flowers. And so if you think about that, it's like, the European chafer beetle comes, creates these disturbances, and all of these wildflowers, their natural role, their ecological role is to help, recover from that disturbance. So they germinate quickly, they flower fast, and, I always think that, it's great to just use seed. Seed is like really, really rewarding to, a small amount of seed turns into these incredible plants, and it's marvelous, right? So things like yarrow, German chamomile, oh my goodness, there's tons of stuff that you can do, any wildflower mixes, and then you're going to have this really great tapestry matrix of grass, your lawn, and flowering plants. And that's a new idea. But so was jazz in the 1920s, and people heard an augmented ninth chord and thought it sounded like noise. But now we hear it and we get it. It sounds like a question, right? So I think it's just reinventing how we think about these things.
It's an excellent analogy. If you wanted to try that, if you wanted to try seeding, where do you go to get seed? What do you do?
Oh yeah, well, I'll tell you, West Coast Seeds, it has a great selection of, you can buy pure species there, you can buy seed mixes, you can make your own, and and there's a lot of other seed suppliers. And I'm telling you, if you're interested in growing plants and you want to do something, that is going to be beneficial to the urban environment, seed is the best way to go, because you're bypassing, all of the pots and all of the, it's just easy and it's inexpensive, right? Like, and it's not much work. So, the students at UBC Botanical Garden and we had a 4,000 square foot area, blackberry, that we had to like remove. And we were thinking about, it's going to take a few years to win the battle here. What do we do to cover the ground? Do we mulch it? No, half a bucket of seed, one person, 10 minutes, $10 a seed basically. And bam, we've got a ground cover for a season, right? So seed's easy and it's really rewarding, looks pretty, and you're working with nature, right? Like you're embracing a natural system. And that's what I think good horticulture is, working with natural systems, embracing them, understanding them.
It reminds me, you're talking about this, there's this seminal book in landscape architecture by Ian McCard, Design with Nature. Really, it looks like that's part of your philosophy of your towards horticulture, is why don't we look at what happens naturally and try and support that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is my philosophy with horticulture. And I've always been inspired by nature, and like I said at the beginning, horticulture is a long journey of growth and learning. And the last number of years for me, I really looked at, I'll go to an environment and look at it and figure out like what's working here, what are the systems in play. And there's some lessons that I've taken away. One lesson about a natural plant community is that it never stays the same, right? And so you can go to an area and see it, and 5 years later you go back and it's changed, and there's that wonderful dynamic aspect. And so things are always changing. There's like succession there. And with your lawns too, and with the chafer beetle, you think about that. You've got this lawn, the chafer just creates the disturbance, you put in the seeding plants and they grow. And so there's like this change, and the surface, the plant community changes over time. So yeah, it is. It's all about embracing, understanding natural systems.
We've got a couple questions. One is, sure, might require a longer answer than we can give it. We've got a couple questions about buttercup and dandelion and how to get rid of them.
Okay.
And then another question about increasing biodiversity for an area that was a forest, but has been cleared.
I see.
Different scales of problems.
Oh yeah, right. So the buttercup will thrive where the soil is moist. And quite honestly, I think this is one of these situations where we have to kind of rethink, why do we consider buttercup in a lawn a problem? Because somebody told us it was a problem, right? I used to be on my hands and knees with a linoleum knife picking clover out of a lawn, and now I'm encouraging people to sow it. So, and if you don't want the buttercup to spread into an adjacent garden, you create a turf edge and it won't spread. And then that's easy enough, right? But if you've got that kind of moisture and there's buttercup, you can use other plants that thrive in moisture to kind of try to outcompete, like a juga and whatnot. So, that's one thing that you can do. And dandelions, dandelions are great plants. They provide a lot of pollen and nectar for bees and whatnot. They do blow around, but the great thing about a dandelion is that you've got lots of time before you need to remove the seed heads if you're concerned about them spreading. So they, their cycle in the season is that they grow, they flower, you can see the seeds forming, and you've got a long window there to just kind of like, hack that off if you need to, right? But
My German relatives love them. They look
yeah,
forward to them blooming in the spring, and they eat the leaves.
there you go. Yeah,
It's
right.
funny that it's an attitude partly too.
It is.
Obviously, this person doesn't like them.
Well, they are hard to, like, you have to change the conditions in order for, like, dandelions won't grow when the soil is really shallow. Like, if you've got 2 centimeters of soil and rock underneath, you're not going to have dandelions, but you're not going to be able to accomplish that, right? So buttercup's not going to grow where it's really dry. But why fight that? Why work that hard to change the conditions? And then there was a question about the forest, right? So the forest has been cleared.
They said it's been stripped clean. It sounds like well, maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about succession. I don't know. How would you answer that question?
Wow, let's just imagine that the forest, there was a massive disturbance in a natural forest, like a fire or a flood or a windstorm, and that's the kind of disturbance where you see, like, the early plants in succession that you see that respond to disturbance, fireweed, things like that, right? So it doesn't have to be fireweed, but what I would suggest, that's a great application for using wildflower mixes. And a wildflower mix is a great thing. It'll last like 1 or 2 years because ecologically, these kinds of responses, these are short-lived plants. And then slowly over time, what happens is other plants start to establish. And so you can start off with the wildflower mix, then you can plug in some longer-lived perennials. Because with a disturbance like that, you might have Himalayan blackberry, and then that gives you, the opportunity to kind of tackle that. And then over time, you can start plugging in shrubs and trees, and but I would approach it like one step at a time over many years. And that's not a matter of waiting. People are like, I don't want to wait. No, enjoy every step and allow it to change naturally.
Right. Gardeners like to tinker that's my experience, right? You like to tinker and try something new, and this is an opportunity to do that in a phased, logical approach.
Absolutely, yeah.
We've got a question about, is it too late to plant sedum? And is there a time that's more walkable?
Oh, it's a great time to plant sedum. Like right now, especially in the Metro Vancouver area, you really can plant almost any time of the year. I mean, the worst time of year to plant, especially woody things, is July, because like it's stressful and it's hot and dry. But even as soon as August, you start getting like dew on the ground and the soil's warm and things root really well. So sedum mats right now, it's great. Like the soil is warm. We're about to head into some warmer weather, but they don't require a lot of water, right? Just sometimes when you plant things like sedum, it's good to water it right after you plant it, and that's mostly just to make contact with the roots in the soil. But after that, very little water is necessary.
It's a good time. Where would you source your sedum mats?
Oh, I would go to your local retail nursery and ask about that. I can think of some wholesalers, but that's not necessarily something for the public. But I would go to your local garden center and tell them. And you know what? If they're not able to supply that, they should be. And so this is a really good direction to be moving in. And so, on a retail level, we need access to this stuff, right? So that's what I would do. Look to your local garden center.
Good advice. We are at the end of our half hour, Egan.
Half an hour?
How did that happen?
Like 30 seconds. This was so much fun.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Karin.
To the people who are watching, there's more information at growgreenguide.ca. Make sure to sign up for our blog to keep getting current information. And Egan, I believe that our next guest, Chris Chung, who's going to be joining us next week, is a former student of yours. Would you be willing to just give us a bit of background information about her and her ideas?
Oh, yeah. So Chris Chung was a brilliant student, and she worked with us at UBC Botanical Garden teaching for a couple of years. And now she does consulting on food gardens and food forests. And Chris is brilliant. She loves growing food. She's really passionate about food forests. You know, everybody's really lucky. I'm really glad to hear that she's coming on next week.
Yeah, we're excited. Well, now we're even more excited after you've told us a bit about her. So the people who are watching, we're going to be speaking with Chris next week on Wednesday at 12:30. It's going to be part 2 of edible food gardening. We hope that you can join us then. Thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. I hope that you've learned something that's of value to the people who had questions that we weren't able to answer. We will be responding to the Facebook chat. Just be patient and we'll be getting back to you. I hope everyone has a fantastic weekend and has some opportunity to get out and get some gardening done.